here. Awesome. I always have to double check and make sure it's going. Cool. So, Cody Timmons, welcome to the Fitness Burrito Podcast. I believe this is going to be episode number 15. I want to say. I can't keep track. I got to make notes. Somebody told me to make notes. So, for anybody listening to the Fitness Burrito Podcast for the first time, my name is Dan Curion. I always just say call me Dan Q because I just still to this day, my name gets butchered, which is all good. But yeah, pretty pumped today. I've got an old friend of mine, an ex kind of alumni from University of New Brunswick. So same university I went to. He's a former volleyball player at the university level. I think you still play, Cody?
I still play a bit of beach, a little bit of senior men's indoor, but I definitely don't got it like I used to. That's for sure.
Okay. So yeah, pretty cool that we're linking up. Cody is kind of fresh off the blocks in the physio world. So pretty excited for this one. I thought it'd be a kind of a cool podcast to have a physiotherapist on because, yeah, especially with a lot of people going back to the gym soon. And I think a lot of people just kind of get confused, like at what point should they go to a physio? So just kind of have all that chat. But like I said, if it's the first time you guys are tuning into this podcast, it's all about basically helping people practically apply info related to kind of health, fitness, nutrition, all that stuff. So yeah, without further ado, let me introduce you guys to my pal, Cody T. Cody, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
And Cody, just, you can go as much detail as you want, mate. Just give the people a little bit of an intro, kind of like where you're from, all that stuff. Because most people probably still think we're American, even though I teed that up already. So yeah, where are you from, man? What are you about? All that stuff.
Yeah, man. So I actually grew up in a town called Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia. And for all those UK listeners out there, that's just outside of Halifax. Born and raised here, grew up, played every sport under the sun. I tried football, basketball, baseball, soccer, and I really started to excel at, volleyball and basketball in high school. So then after high school, decided I was going to go to UMB, which is where I met the host, Danny Q.
Yep.
I think we met each other through friends. Had a couple crazy nights on Graham Ave back in the day.
Yeah.
A couple 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And then the rest is history. Those were the good old days, man.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, I studied kin at UMB, just as you. And then afterwards, I graduated after 5 years playing varsity volleyball there. And then I worked for a year. I had a year off, and I decided to work because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And then kind of at the end of that year, I decided, I really want to kind of keep my hand in exercise, but I also kind of want to work in healthcare as well. So I decided, why not apply to physio? So I applied to a couple different physio programs around the country. I ended up getting accepted to Dow, which is, 30-minute drive right from my house. So financially, that was the best choice for me. So I went through their program, 2-year master's program, pretty intense, pretty demanding. And then I just graduated last year, and I was lucky enough to get hired on kind of at my home clinic right in my backyard, basically at Beaverbank Physiotherapy. So, and that's kind of a clinic that I grew up going to. So in high school, like many other volleyball and basketball players, I suffered from repetitive ankle sprains. And, I went there on and off for about 2-3 years. And then I was a volunteer there for one summer. And then they took me on as a student. And then they hired me on like fresh out of that last placement. So I kind of built my way up right from high school. So it was definitely an interesting come up. Loving every minute of it. I still feel like I'm kind of a rookie in the game. You know what I mean? Like I'm still new. I've only been working there 9 months now. So I'm still learning every day, getting more confident with every day. So it's still kind of a work in progress, but, I'm loving every minute of it.
Nice, man. And Cody, Cody's one of those white guys out there that's kind of like contributing to the whole white guys can't jump culture, but he can. So massively appreciate Cody because, yeah, he was soaring above the net back in the day.
Yeah, man.
And, for anybody who has no idea where Halifax is, just if you look at the map, we're on the East Coast. Like we're above New York around that end. And he dropped a bit of a Graham Street reference. For anybody who has no idea what that is, it just used to be the spot. Like it was just couches were burning, they're on fire. Like shit was just crazy back then.
Yeah, man. Grand Ave was basically known for their couch fires. Like there'd be like a couple
Yeah.
couch fires a week. It was crazy, man. I remember hearing stories about it before we went to UMB. And I was like, oh, like how many couches can there be to light on fire? And then we got there and every weekend there was a couch on fire. It was crazy.
Yeah. It'd be like front page of the paper. It'd be like,
I know.
yeah,
That's why I say that if the Fredericton Police Department's listening, like me and Danny Q weren't there. We weren't there.
Yeah. There's still that file still open 20 years later. Yeah. Crazy, man. No, but, you just mentioned, and I'm just going to ask you a few questions off your intro, but you said you applied to a few different universities and stuff. Was Dal kind of top of the list? Oh, I got Cody's
to save a bit of money.
Sorry, bro. You're a bit frozen there. Say that again.
Oh, shoot.
That's all right.
My connection's lagging a little bit. Am I good?
Yeah, it has that East Link connection.
Yeah, no, man. But yeah, no, I applied to Dal. I applied to Queen's. And then there's actually a really good physio program in Glasgow, Scotland. So that was kind of my other plan. But I got accepted to Dal, luckily, and it was just financially, it was the right choice for me, right? It's kind of right down the road in Halifax. I've got all my friends and my family here. I considered going to Queen's, but with that being said, it would have been pretty expensive. I would have had to go halfway across the country, things like that. So I chose Dal, and like it was kind of the best 2 years of my life, man. I met 60 other people that I'm still tight with, pretty much like 5 or 6 of them, and it was definitely kind of a crucial call for me, but it was life changing in the same sense. So
nice, man. That's cool. Have you been to Glasgow? Have you ever been that way?
No, I went out to I explored Ireland for about a week, but I never got up to Scotland.
Oh man, that would have been a time. The people in Scotland are good people, man. And yeah, Glasgow's a cool little spot. Cool, man. Well, listen, I appreciate you taking the time. Like I said at the beginning, I'm excited to just kind of get your opinion on a few things. And like I said, just dive into a bit of the world of physio, things that you see quite often, and how we could just hopefully help people prevent injuries, really. So the first kind of question I had for you was kind of at what point should people really kind of go see you? Because like I was talking to clients over the last couple of weeks, and I've spoken to clients in the past, and even just myself, like I think a lot of people would either just think to go straight to the GP, straight to the doctor, whatever. And a lot of people might think, oh, physio is just kind of like in a month. Like if I'm not better in a month's time or in like 6 weeks time, yeah, I'll go to a physio, rather than maybe thinking about going right away. At kind of what point would you say someone should go if they're having like a nagging injury, they just can't get over it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's it's kind of tough when it comes to to decipher like when to go where and who to go to when in terms of the healthcare system. But I know for the most part, doctors, they kind of have this specialty in like diagnosing whether it's orthopedic or whether it's a separate issue. It could be a respiratory issue or a cardiac problem, things like that. The example I use of, let's say if I got pain right here, well, then I can go to my GP and they can tell me, well, is that an SC joint irritation? Is that a cardiac problem? Is that a respiratory issue? Maybe that's a nerve problem from the neck. They can kind of decipher whether that is a physio appropriate problem. And then they can kind of refer you on down the line. But yeah, physio is basically like, in a nutshell, I'd say we're more of like an exercise-based profession. So we kind of try to seek out the cause of the injury rather than like where the pain is exactly. So obviously we deal with a lot of acute injuries. Like we'll get, the fresh ankle sprains or the MCL injuries and stuff like that. But we kind of seek out why it happened and where there's kind of strength imbalances among the body to try to fix that. So I guess when you'd come to us, it depends. Like we do treat acute injuries, but we also can treat that kind of nagging pain, that weird knee pain that's causing you not be able to run as far and certain things like that. So it's definitely a good question. Doctors can more decipher whether it's a physio related problem, and then physios can kind of take over after that.
Okay, cool. Because I think even me, like, in my side kind of job as a coach and personal trainer, sometimes like you probably get this quite a bit. I was going to ask you, do you get annoyed with people like me who sometimes think that we know more than a physio?
Well,
Because like I don't think I know more than you, by the way, but I just sometimes somebody goes to a physio, they come back, and I'm like, what did they tell you to do? And they tell me some bullshit response. I'm like, really? I was like, fuck, what are they doing? And like, that's not all the physio. Don't get me wrong. There's some really, really good ones, but sometimes I just get annoyed. I'm like, I could have told you that. And then it gives me confidence that I know more. And I'm just like,
no,
oh,
yeah,
I got to stop
yeah.
doing that.
A lot of times it is the patient that kind of communicates back and forth between the physio and the personal trainer.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I feel like sometimes things do get lost in translation a little bit, but I like, it's kind of an issue out here in Halifax where I haven't really found a good personal trainer that I can like
Shots
confidently
fired. Shots fired in Halifax right
No,
now.
but I mean like I don't feel confident giving my patient to like Joe Blow at Good Life, right? Because he's just going to make them load up the deadlift bar, the squat bar, and have them do their 1 hour M on day one when they still have, some hip pain to rehab or something like that, right? So and I've only been in the game 8 months, so I'm still kind of seeking out who I can trust and who I can't trust in the personal training game. Like for instance, if I had you here or the Glasgow PT, the other guy you had on the podcast, like you guys seem like you really know your shit and you study the game well. So I'd have no problem referring patients to you guys, but I just get scared just kind of throwing them to other personal trainers without knowing what their, kind of what their philosophy is and what their knowledge is of the profession. So it's kind of tough at times. So if there's any good personal trainers around Halifax listening, like feel free to reach out.
Yeah,
But
I was just about to say that, and that's you literally kind of just almost jumped to my next question. But I was just going to ask: have you ever had a PT, like a personal trainer, actually reach out to you since you've gone into the physio game?
no.
Okay, so
No.
like to me, like you just said, if you're in Halifax right now and you are a personal trainer, you better fucking reach out to Cody because like that's one thing that I used to do. Not
And
because
the
not because
crazy
of
thing is like,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just gonna say it's crazy because like my clinic is basically situated between two of the most popular gyms in Sackville. So, we've got a Good Life over here and we've got the Sackville Sports Stadium over here. If I was a personal trainer at either of those gyms, like I'd make a point to go out one day, touch base with some of the physios, at least go have a conversation with them. And then that way, like, you'll probably get a bunch of clients given to you through that, through reaching out like that. But, I haven't had, even though I'm literally a stone throw away from a huge gym in Sackville that everyone goes to, I still haven't had a personal trainer kind of come into the clinic and be like, hey, look, I'm looking to kind of treat people that you're treating as well. So it's no, I haven't had it yet. That'd be nice because I'd give them a lot of business, but I haven't had that yet. That being said, I am pretty new, so hopefully
Yeah.
that'll happen someday.
I think after, I mean, assuming that a few people listen to the episode because they know you and stuff, and if there's personal trainers in Sackville that which I'm sure you do, I'm sure you'll get a few calls because that's one thing that I remember when I was, kind of full-time personal trainer. I'm trying to fix this light over here. When I was a full-time personal trainer, I remember like I would call the physios and the chiropractors, not because I was trying to show off, but just because I wanted to know what the hell is going on. Because like you said, sometimes like your client comes back and they tell you one thing and you're like, doesn't really sound right. And I would just call them and I would just kind of say, look, and then most of them would say, oh, I can't tell you that information because of GDPR. And I was like, sweet, thanks. But at least I tried. And then a few of the PTs that I was managing, they started kind of linking up. It's like you said, especially during these times with COVID and like, God knows what the personal training industry is going to be like, and I'd be kind of curious to know what yours is going to be like. But yeah, you need to reach out and network more than ever, because it's just crazy times. I know it's taken a big hit over here, and it'll be interesting to see how people respond. But how's it for physios right now?
It was weird for a minute there. We had to basically we were just like everyone else, and we got laid off, and we had to do what's called telehealth. So we basically did physio through video call. And it was really good for things like exercise progression or pain management advice and things like that. But, at the end of the day, like our profession is a lot of hands-on work. So it wasn't as good as having someone in clinic. So it was a struggle for a bit there, but we just got back to the clinic 2 weeks ago, and we managed to fill up like that. Like, I guess throughout this period, so many people have been sedentary, right? And they haven't been nearly as active as they'd normally be. So they've got all these aches and pains that are kind of resurfacing. And then we've actually managed to fill our schedules pretty quickly.
That's
But
good.
for a while there, it was an uncertain time, right? They call it the new normal, but I don't really see it as normal still. It's still weird to me. But yeah, finally, we're finally the restrictions are starting to lift, and we're starting to get back to somewhat of a normal lifestyle. But for a while there, it was weird for sure.
Yeah, I think you guys, for again, anybody who's in the UK, I won't really talk about the US because God knows what's going on down there. But yeah, I know the UK, like it's rough, but it's starting to get better. But I know you guys had it kind of like a bit of the worst, I'd say, on the East Coast, didn't you, in Canada? I think you guys had some of the higher numbers. So it's good to see you guys kind of coming out to the other end there. But it's good, man. Glad to hear that's going well. So
Yeah.
the other thing I was just going to ask you, in terms of like chiropractors and stuff, do you link up quite a bit with those guys? Like, do you guys ever call and pick up the phone to each other and be like, oh, yo, I've got Dan Q over here. His back's fucked. Oh yeah, I did some work on him last week. Like, do you guys communicate? Because I always thought a really cool idea, and I'm sure it exists, is having a center that would have like your chiro, your physio, your GP, just everyone all under one roof, and would just kind of like case study and just smash it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be a sweet idea, honestly. If you could have every healthcare professional kind of all under one roof, sitting at one table, like I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that kind of on that conversation. But when it comes to chiro, it's I've seen physios that communicate directly, and I've seen chiros and physios that actually work side by side. But a lot of time it seems like there's a little bit of there's kind of this unspoken divide between them in a sense. Because chiros, it seems like they kind of make their profession off what you call spinal or biomechanical adjustments or realignments, and that's kind of the hallmark treatment for chiros. Like, when you go in there, you get cracked up, and then you leave feeling 2 inches taller and you're straight as an arrow, right? Well, there's physios now that are kind of getting certified in manual therapy. So for instance, the physios I work with, they're all level 5 manual therapists, which is the highest level you can be in Canada. So they can basically crack you from head to toe, or they can do any sort of manual therapy technique they want to on you, as well as a chiro. And in the same breath, chiros are starting to develop a little bit more of a physio philosophy in the sense that they'll do these spinal adjustments, but they'll also give you, a program of stability exercises to help improve your posture long-term and things like that, right? So a lot of the professions are starting to kind of overlap in a sense. Like, we do have our two respective scopes, but they kind of overlap a little bit. And I feel like the deeper we get into the evolution of each profession, the slower they start to become closer and closer together, right? So there's a lot of physios out there, especially the more experienced ones. There's a lot of physios and there's a lot of chiros that feel like they've got all the bags of tricks, right? Like, they can do it all. They don't really need the other profession. And you can kind of see that a lot at times. That being said, most chiros and most physios seem to be open to other suggestions and open to other opinions of different healthcare professionals. But you do notice, like, generally overall, it seems like there's a little bit of a divide almost.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just me being fresh out of school, but it's like I definitely we're a very physio based clinic, and then I've been in clinics that are just like strictly chiro based, and it's almost like they treat very similarly. So it's an interesting one. But.
Yeah, no, I was just curious, and I was just kind of a bit of a side tangent because for some reason, have always looked at them as being like polar opposites. Like, they hate each other, they can't stand each other, they don't want to work together. But naturally, like you said, I'm not surprised that they're actually becoming quite similar because the markets it's just everything's so competitive. How do you like make yourself stand out? And I guess you make yourself stand out by getting more credentials and more certifications, and that by the end of it, you're pretty much the same. So it's quite interesting. Cool, man. Well, I think that's a good insight into kind of what to look at when you want to go to a physio, things like that. So cheers for that. This one was just because my housemate, she's actually a personal trainer. She used to work at the gym I managed, and she was like, how do you remember everything? That's the first, I was like, wait, what do you want me to ask Cody? Is there anything you want me to, she's like, how does he remember everything? I was like, I'll ask him. So I guess you've been studying for 2 years, which helps, but do you have to brush up on your stuff? Like, do you read certain things every day?
All the time, man. All the time. Yeah, pretty much. I catch myself like in clinic, I'll be, ripping through textbooks, or I'll be firing off a quick Google search here and there because, at the end of the day, it's hard to keep all that stored all at once. And I find myself, I'll need a refresher basically daily. So if we ever get like an initial assessment, like if I have a new patient, it will usually say like ankle underneath. So I'll know what's coming in at least. And that way it gives me 5 minutes to kind of do a quick Google search, okay, well, what are the bones of the feet? What muscles and tendons cross the ankle? What are the osteokinematics of the ankle? Certain things like that. So I'll go into the assessment, it's kind of fresh in there because I just searched it up. Mind you, I've got, some of the people I work with, they've been in the game 15, 20 years. So to them, it's like bread and butter, right? It's second nature. They can rhyme it off like it's nothing. But for me right now, I'm still at a point where I still need that constant refresher. So yeah, it's a lot of just basically in-clinic research, ripping out old textbooks, certain things like that. Through the course of our kin grad and my physio school, I think I've done 7 anatomy courses now. So, with that much education, you think it would stick pretty heavy, but I still kind of need that refresher.
Yeah. I mean, we were athletes, right? So we didn't study that hard.
That's it. Too busy lighting couch bars.
Yeah.
But there was actually one luxury we had at Dow where we got to go up in a clinic and everyone got assigned their own cadaver. So basically we went out and we unveiled this body, and then we got a scalpel and, we'd peel away the skin and we'd get to see how each muscle was oriented. We got to see how deep each muscle was, how big the rotator cuff muscles are, we got to kind of pick apart the sciatic nerve and things like that. So that when we did that, that was something that kind of really made it stick because you don't forget, right? You're picking apart a human body. So when we went through that, that was definitely something that really drove it home for me.
That's cool, man. So if, just to summarize, Cody's winging it, right? He's just winging it. He's just Google searching. You heard it here first. That's what he said 5 minutes
That's
before.
It.
No, that sounds pretty cool. And like, that's what I'd imagine anyways, because it's the same thing for us. Obviously we're not treating clients in a clinic, but the amount of times I've had to just Google stuff and people ask you questions and you think, oh my God, I don't remember. You're like, hold up for 1 minute. And then you search on your phone, or you'll just check it when you get home at night, and then you'll ping them, like a massive essay about what's going on. But no, that's interesting. Defo something that I think a lot of people are gravitating towards more and more and more is becoming a physio. It was popular back in the day, and I'm sure it's a million times more popular now for sure. Cool, man. So what are some of the more common injuries that you see that you think could be, in your opinion, could be avoided? And I guess in terms of like suggestions, how could we kind of help people avoid these? Because to me, I'm thinking, oh, you must see ankles loads, you must see knees loads, you must see everything loads. But what are the most common ones that you're just like, really?
Yeah, we definitely. Yeah, you get a fair share of everything, but I'd say probably the most avoidable injuries are repetitive or chronic knees and low back, which it's insane. That probably makes up about 50% of my caseload, and it's so avoidable. So basically, with any sort of like the knee's a pretty simple joint. It's a hinge joint. It's got 1 degree of freedom. It goes into flexion, extension. So there's no real side-to-side movement. It's not like the shoulder and the hip where they can go in a million degrees, right? It's basically forward and backward. So if there is an injury with the knee and it's a repetitive injury, chances are it's a strength issue or a biomechanical issue. So a lot of the times when people come in with, let's say they're a runner and they're like, yo, right around 3 kilometers, like clockwork, I always get this pain on the inside of my knee. I'm like, okay, well, let's see you do a squat, or let's see you do a lunge, and then let's get you on the treadmill. And it's almost always that they have weak glutes so that they have this valgus alignment with their knee. So their knee's kind of tracking in over their ankle with every step they take. okay, well, let's test your quad and hamstring strength. And they're usually really strong when it comes to their upper leg muscles. And then when I test their glutes, they just tend to be weak. And it's almost like that across the board with any sort of repetitive knee problem, because they don't have the hip strength to be able to hold their femur in place, right? So a lot of times it's as simple as just getting them on isolation glute med exercises, external rotation exercises, basic glute exercises. And then with that being said, you kind of need to teach them how to use that with functional activity as well. So you need to teach them to turn those muscles on as they run, as they do stairs, things like that. But it's such an avoidable thing that people don't really understand until I start to test the strength of their glutes. And they're like, holy shit, man, I am weak there. It's crazy. And then also low backs, and low backs are so prevalent, especially in Canada and the United States. Like, it's crazy, man. Everyone's coming in with low back pain. And it's usually something that's occurred over years, what we call mechanical low back pain. And they just, it's essentially, it comes from being weak in your core region, as well as your glutes and your lumbar stabilizers. So these are kind of areas that are weak in most general population. If you're not someone that goes to the gym and kind of makes a point to like isolate these muscle groups, they're usually pretty weak, because with everyday activity, let's say you're at work or you're cooking supper or whatever, you're not really engaged in your core and your glutes. You're not making a point to like squeeze those muscles back in neutral. You really isolate those areas when you get on a proper gym program and you make a point to hit those muscle groups. So a lot of people come in, they'll be like, I've had back pain for years and years and years. And then I test their core strength, and they don't even have the ability to activate their core. Like, it's not even like there's strength there. They just can't even connect, like make the connection from their brain to that muscle. Which results in, their lumbar spine over rotating. And then you throw in lifting and everything goes out of whack, right? So when it comes to knees and backs, chronic pain or repetitive strain, it can usually just be fixed with some simple exercise. And, people don't really understand. Yeah, I'd say those are the two biggest ones when it comes to the most avoidable injuries that I see. I'd say knees and low backs for sure.
It's interesting because I bet you too, the people that are doing, that have the weak glutes are probably the ones that actually lift quite heavy in a squat potentially. But because, like you said, they're not really isolating,
What's
the
that,
glute.
sorry?
I was just saying, like, the people that are probably getting pain in let's say, I don't know, their knees and their hips are a bit weak. They're the ones that probably actually load the bar up quite a bit when they're doing squats. But then they're like, well, what do you mean my glutes aren't strong? And I'm like, I'm lifting 100 kilos plus, right? But you're like, yeah, but your glute med is not firing because you're always just doing the same sagittal movements or the same plane movements, right?
That's it.
And it's just interesting. Like, I'm guilty of that. Like, the amount of knee stuff I've had to go through just because I was being stupid and just basically couldn't swallow my pride and just do some clamshells, right? Or some simple exercises.
That's it.
But it is interesting, in terms of core, because I know you mentioned core strength. How do you coach someone to engage their core?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So whenever I say core strengthening, it seems like everyone thinks I'm talking about rectus abdominis, right? They're thinking about that six pack that bodybuilders have. And they're like, okay, well, I can just do some curl ups and I'll be good, which is never the case, right? There's four main core muscles, right? You've got your rectus abdominis, you've got your internal, external obliques. And then deep to all of that, you've got your transverse abdominis. And transverse abdominis are like one of our primary lumbar stabilizers, right? They nicknamed it the corset muscle because it kind of wraps from front to back, and it's a very, thin.
I paused it anyways. I think it was just the connection was being a bit funny. It's that Atlantic Canada connection.
Okay. I know, man. I'm telling you.
That's all right. You were you were talking about transverse abdominis. So sorry if that just cut out for everybody listening out there. I'll try to snip it with my mediocre editing skills. But yeah, so Cody, you were talking about how there's the four muscles in the core. So rectus abdominis, which, by the way, like the rectus abdominis is what everybody kind of strives to look like, right? In terms of that look, it's that six pack that you see on all your Instagram feeds, and you think, oh man, like that guy looks that guy looks great. She looks amazing. That's not really your core, right? That's just like the aesthetic kind of layer. But you were talking about like the obliques. Obviously, it all plays together. But you were just talking about the transverse abdominis, which is like the deep core muscle, which you call it a quartet. What did you call it?
It's called the corset muscle. So that that thing that way back in like the 50s, like ladies used to put on the corset to help like squeeze their midsection together.
Yeah.
They nicknamed that the corset muscle because it basically runs from front to back and helps stabilize our lumbar spine, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a tough one to activate too. Like I find a lot of the problem is people just don't even really know how to activate it, right? So half my sessions are spent trying to convince people like, okay, there is a muscle down there and you just don't know how to activate it yet. And then when they do get it and they feel themselves activate it, they're like, oh my God, like, okay, they kind of have like a come to Jesus moment. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, that muscle, that's the one you're talking about. So it's crucial towards lumbar stability, and it should be activated with like any functional activity, in my opinion. But so many people just don't really have the ability to be able to activate it.
And what would be your go-to exercise just to help people strengthen their core? Like the one of them that comes to mind for me is just like a dead bug. I try to just get a lot of my clients just do a simple dead bugs, right? Before they even progress to anything. What would yours usually be?
Yeah, and I even actually take it a step back with simplicity there. I usually just get them to activate it to start, and I'll get them to hold it for 5 or 10 seconds. And then when they get better ability to activate that muscle, I'll start to throw in dynamic work. So something as easy as turn your transverse abdominis on and lift your foot off the ground, or turn your TA on and heel slide. And as soon as they can start to do these very basic dynamic movements while they're lying flat, then I'll start to get them in either a standing or a sitting position, see if they can do it from there. And then if they got a good handle on that, and sometimes that can take 2-3 weeks. And once they got a good handle on that, we'll start to throw in some things like dead bugs or some bird dog or things like that, right? But I usually, with patients, I usually basically keep it as simple as I can. And then kind of work my way up.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going way back. So when we were back in university, did you do the functional anatomy course?
Was that Ken Seaman?
Yeah, it might have been Ken. It probably was Ken when you did it, and I forget who it was for me. But I think it definitely was Ken. Yeah. And I remember one of the first things that he made us do, because a lot of it, I think, ties into what you were just saying, which is you're trying to get that mind-muscle connection, but you're also just trying to develop motor patterns, right? So for anybody out there who's not really sure what that means, is you're just trying to basically create a pattern that you can always kind of get out the back of your head and go, this is what we're doing. And we're trying to reproduce it. And we always want to make sure it's the right, correct pattern. And I remember in this class, he was saying, okay, we're going to reset how your core works. And he just made us lay on our back. And I remember, because it was so difficult, it was just as simple as reaching across your body and trying to basically flip yourself from your back onto your stomach without moving your legs or your arms or anything, right? And that's when people started to realize, like, wow, I'm using my legs to flip over. I'm using my arms. I'm using this. I'm using that, rather than just turning my core on and actually just like flipping myself over, which when you think about it, it's kind of like what you just said. You're making people just do the basics, moving their legs, sliding their heel across the floor. And when you kind of relate it back to a baby, right? If you put a baby on his back, what's it trying to do? It's trying to flip itself because it can't figure it out. And eventually it does, right? Because it starts probably figuring out how to turn its core on, and then it starts kind of getting better motor control and motor patterns. So it's funny how you literally still do that, as simple as, like you said, moving someone's foot, lifting it off the ground, doing things like that. Because I think that's where, as an industry, especially like as PTs, like personal trainers, we overcomplicate it so much, so much.
Yeah, and I know a lot of physios that still kind of adopt like developmental period of childhood, like how we go through the different stages of development and develop these movement patterns over time. I know physios that'll basically cater their entire exercise progression program towards how that happened as we were infants, right? And they'll bring it back to the bare bones of our childhood and reteach people how to move based on this developmental progress, right? So that's a very good point. Yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of and that's kind of one thing with me. A lot of our exercises are so simple that I expect, like, I feel like athletes like you and I, we've gone through a lot of like very complex exercises and like co-activation of different areas and certain things like that. Whereas we didn't really put much emphasis on the basics and on just this simple isolation exercises. So a lot of times I've got to really break it down for patients because I almost expect them to like get it right away or understand it right away. Whereas like I realize, okay, no, like I really need to kind of spend some time on this area, make sure they're feeling it in the right place, make sure their alignment's good, things like that. So it's a daily struggle to really kind of break down the simplicity of an exercise for my patients, as opposed to kind of just progressing it right away into something more functional or something that's a little more challenging for them.
And that's always a sign of a good coach. When you're self-aware of that, that's when you know you're getting better. Because it's the ones that don't, that just basically throw shit at somebody and expect it to stick. And then they're like, what do you mean you can't do this? And the person's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea what that muscle is, right? And then you're like, oh, my bad. And then this is where probably one of the biggest things I've learned too in the last 4 or 5 years is you just have to relate it to what they actually like and understand and know, right? And it might be as simple as like in the UK, obviously it's all about their football teams. So it'd be like, oh, imagine you had a Man U crest on your t-shirt and you're trying to show it off to the other team, right? And it's Liverpool over there. And they're like, oh, yeah. And then next thing you know, their chest is popping up, right? And in Canada, I'd be like, look, you're a Habs fan. The Maple Leafs are over there. You're trying to let them know, right? It's like, it's just crazy how it works. Simple coaching.
Yeah.
So, no, that's cool, man. I think that's really helpful. In terms of warm-up exercises then, because this is what I thought would be interesting, because I think we just kind of probably nailed it already, but like, you know, people don't do the simple things. What are some of the simple or top warm-up tips that you feel we should all be doing? And do you think there's any difference between just general pop and athletes? Because there'll be a few athletes out here listening to this in general pop, and they'll be thinking, oh, does it make a difference what I do?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say, you know, this kind of dates back to our old UMB days too. Like I remember, I always bring this question back to the old LB gym, which was our kind of performance center as athletes. And it was just basically tucked in to the bottom of the oldest building at UMB, old dusty old gym. You had the wrestlers on one side. I actually loved it. Like it was pretty bad, but I loved it. Nowadays they have like $1 million performance center and all that stuff, but we kind of made do with what we had. And I should give a quick shout out to Trevor Party, who was our personal trainer at the time. And then Ken Morrison came on a couple of years after that. But he had us doing like activation and warm up exercises for like 40, 50 minutes. I remember I'd go down there for a workout and, you know, I'd be an hour into my workout and I'd look at my buddy Brooks and I'd be like, bro, we have like, all we've been doing is warming up. We're like, holy shit, man. But I think back now and I'm like, man, like that guy knew what he was talking about. Basically all those exercises were catered towards injury prevention and mobility work to make us better athletes, right? Like he really put some thought and time into those programs. And even though I didn't really see it at the time, I think back now I'm like, man, he knew what he was talking about back then. So I like to even grab some of those warm up tips that he had us doing. But basically my perfect warm up would be obviously get a good sweat on, like make sure the blood's flowing. Chances are you've got adequate blood flow all over the body. And then from there, I like to do some scapular activation exercises. So emphasis on lower traps. I know a lot of athletes, they're very like upper trap dominant, right? Like they have no problem activating upper and middle traps. When it comes to lower traps, they kind of have a little bit of trouble activating that. So I'll always do some lower trap activation exercises. If they're an overhead athlete or a throwing athlete, I'll always do like an extensive rotator cuff warm up. So maybe some no money, some external rotation up at 90 degrees, certain things like that, get the rotator cuff going. And then glutes and core are two big ones as well. So I'll always have them do some glute bridges, some clamshells, some hip abduction, certain things like that. And then I'll get them to jump into basic core exercises like dead bugs or bird dog or certain things like that. So those are kind of my 4 areas. So, scapular stability, rotator cuff warm up, glute activation, core activation. Make sure all those muscles are firing well. Make sure you got a good enough sweat on that there's kind of blood flow to the entire body, and then jump into sport specific movement. So then whether you're a volleyball athlete, jump into some, side lunges, or whether you're a basketball player, jump into some, some plyometrics or something like that. So that's when I'll get them into some more sport specific movements, have them doing a little bit more aggressive activity. And then after that, jump into the workout.
Cool. I think that's a lot. I think that's, again, really helpful, because I would say right now, most PTs, and again, I know you refer to PT as physio, so personal trainers, especially over here, I think like everyone knows it should warm up. But I think a lot of people are kind of skipping steps. Like you've pretty much, in a way, you've kind of described like the ramp warm up, right? But you just individualized it for the person. I think a lot of us now, what we do is we just kind of like get people warmed up in 30 seconds, and then we just make them do like the world's greatest stretch 5 times each side, and then that's it, right? And you're like, yeah, it's better than nothing. And you think, well, at least my client's actually doing it, because I know that if I was in here, they'd do fuck all. So might as well get the greatest stretch going. But then realistically, they should be doing the clamshells, and they should be doing maybe glute specific work, because they're going to go do some squats, or they're going to be doing some front squats. And then they should be doing maybe some rotator cuff stuff, even if they're not throwing, because God knows most people don't do a warm up when they do shoulders anyways, right? So yeah, I think if anybody's out there listening to what Cody just said, just warm up and take your time, because like he said, we used to do it for an hour. And Trevor, good old Trevor P out there, I was literally chatting to him the other day. Man, he's the GOAT. Like, he's the GOAT.
He is, man. He is, dude. And I miss him, dude. He knew what he was doing back then. Like, I almost took him for granted back then. I remember one time, I'll never forget. I hope he listens to this too. I'll never forget. I had my bench set up, and I was one of the stronger athletes on the volleyball team, right? I'd been working out for a few years before this. And my bench was kind of sideways by like maybe 2 degrees. Like it was barely noticeable by the human eye. Like it was a little bit. And he came over and he says, like, he ripped into me, right? Like, if you're trying to take this serious, you got to focus on detail, man. You got to focus on the little things. He let me have it that day. And I was like, shit, bro. Like, he's right. You know what I mean? So I fixed my bench. And then from that point on, I put like more focus and more detail into my workouts and how I move properly. But I'll never forget that moment from Trevor Party, man. He let me have it that day, and it stuck, dude.
That's so funny. Yeah, Cody had the biggest chest on campus. Like every time he went to the club, Cody had the V-neck showing. It was just like, Jesus, Cody, come on, give us a chance. Couldn't even.
I remember one time Dan McMorrin, and I was in his office, and it was after second year. He said, "I need Cody Timmons the middle blocker. I don't need Cody Timmons the middle linebacker." He said, "I want you to cut 20 pounds right now."
That's funny. That's class.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, no, good old days. We could do a podcast episode just going throwbacks and getting a bunch of the boys on. Be a good time. All right, cool, man. Well, I think that's helpful. And again, it's super simplistic. Like it doesn't need to be overcomplicated, but I think at the end of the day, just if you can have somebody identify your weaknesses, you can get a bit of advice. Like I'm sure you could reach out to Cody and just ask him, and he'd probably hit you up and give you like a bunch of stuff, and give you probably more value than you thought. So don't be afraid to ask if you're not really sure. So what I usually do is at one part of the podcast towards the end is we usually do a flavor of the week segment, because we're the Fitness Burrito, so it makes sense. And one that I thought would be cool to just talk through, and we don't have to go into crazy detail, it was just kind of like proprioception work. And I'm a big fan of kind of proprioception training, and it's something that I wish I would have done a lot more of. And again, it was probably in our warm-ups, and I just kind of half-assed it and didn't realize. So this one is a study. So it's from 2016, I believe, and it's basically called proprioceptive training and injury prevention in a professional men's basketball team. It's a 6-year prospective study. So basically what they did is they just looked at a whole bunch of athletes over 6 years. And I thought I'd kind of get your opinion on this, because I'm sure you guys do some of these things in your clinic, Cody. And they looked at, I think it was 55 players that kind of came in and out of this program. And I believe it was in Italy. It was like one of their higher leagues. And they basically just checked how proprioceptive training would influence the reduced risk of injury. So in a nutshell, basically they showed that they were able to kind of improve ankle sprains by 81%. This was like after 6 years. Low back pain showed similar results with a reduction of about 77%. Reduction in knee sprains was about 64.5%. And this is, again, kind of like spanning across the 6 years. Certain years had better progressions versus others. But basically, it showed that if you're doing some kind of proprioceptive work in your training, if you're an athlete, if you're a runner, whatever that might be, chances are it's going to massively help. So I thought I'd kind of get your opinion on this, Cody, and kind of ask you, like, what do you think proprioceptive training should be used for? And I guess, what is it? Do you guys use it in your clinic? If you want to kind of just dive into that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I think proprioception, first of all, is huge for ankle rehab and ankle stability, more so than any other joint in the body. With various joints, you can do strengthening exercises and certain stability exercises that help with that. But with ankles, it's like, in my opinion, it's got to be like 80% proprioceptive exercises. Like, you can do some strengthening around the ankle joint in terms of banded eversion, banded inversion, banded dorsiflexion. You can work on the mobility of the ankle and stuff like that. But, the real meat and potatoes of working on ankle stability is going to be proprioceptive exercises. So we do a lot of that stuff in clinic. I usually start by getting patients basically just to do a single leg stance, which is the exercise this study used as well. And then to progress that, I'll have them do it eyes closed. And then I'll get them on a non-compliant surface. So I'll have them stand on a foam pad or a Bosu ball or something like that, right? But yeah, I think it's a crucial part of any sort of ankle rehab. I wish I had done more of it in my lifetime, because I suffered from at least one bad ankle sprain a year, which set me back 2-3 weeks at a time. And that was consistent right through grade 9 all the way to current day. I still have problems, right? And it comes back to a lack of proprioceptive exercises with me, because I can, back in the day when I first started to really sprain my ankles, it seemed like all the work was just banded resisted work. And, you can strengthen up your peroneal and you can strengthen up tibia and all these areas. But if your body doesn't really know where that joint, or if your mind doesn't know where that joint's at in space, when you jump and you land on someone's foot, then chances are you're going over on it again, right? So I think just to not only improve the strength around the ankle, but also improve your body awareness and where your ankle is at in space. And I think they alluded to that in this study. They said, when they talked to the subjects of the study, they said, I think they went from 90% that had ankle stability devices, so like either taping or bracing around their ankles, to the end of the study there was only 30%. So more than half the team went and threw their braces in the garbage, and they said, I feel better than ever. I feel good because when I jump, I've got more confidence. Like they feel like their body can adjust. And 2, they just know where their foot's at in space, so they're able to land properly without that high risk of rolling it again. So I really enjoyed that study. Could definitely relate to it personally. Yeah. And without a doubt, proprioception plays the most crucial role in ankle stability.
And I think for anybody out there who's wondering what proprioception is, and Cody kind of alluded to it a little bit, I look at it because, sometimes I just try to say it's basically balancing work, right? But I think when you kind of peel it back, it's a bit more detailed than that. It's essentially your body's trying to figure out where it is in space, and it's trying to correct itself while it's doing so. So as simple as what Cody mentioned, which is, standing on one leg, maybe then closing your eyes and then slowly progressing to like a wobble board, or like, I know at the moment I've seen quite a few, not studies, but just a lot of kind of professional S&C coaches out there that train like some of the top NBA players. They're using like water bags and stuff like that. because that seems to be something that they're kind of starting to use, including strength work. So they're starting to pair both together, which is quite like interesting. But one thing I was going to ask you is, at what point do you think somebody should jump towards like a wobble board or doing something like kind of Bosu ball? Because sometimes I feel like people jump to that really quickly rather than just
Yeah.
kind of like mastering a single leg, like single leg stance for a minute.
Yeah. No, I'd say for me, as soon as they're past that acute phase of an ankle sprain, so right after, whether it's 5 to 7 days and the swelling's starting to reduce, I'll have them go on some basic resisted exercises, and then I'll basically get them on a single leg stance instantly. And as soon as they can hold that single leg stance without pain, without like serious wobbling for about 30 seconds, then I'll get them on the foam pad. And the foam pad, it's a good bridge between just a solid surface and the wobble board or the Bosu ball, because it's not as challenging as a wobble board and Bosu ball, but it still adds a little bit of a non-compliant factor to it. So I'll get them on the foam pad, and then as soon as they can master the foam pad for about 20, 30 seconds, I'll jump them up. So I tend to progress them pretty quickly. But yeah, you're right. You definitely want to get them good at a single leg stance before they move to any sort of non-compliant surface.
And this is another question I had, because I remember when I was coming up through high school, I literally had no injuries ever. And then one day, this is a bit of a side tangent, but then one day I remember one of my buddies came to practice and he had orthotics, right? And his dad was actually a doctor, and he was talking about how great he felt and how he could run faster and jump high. And for some reason, I decided to get orthotics. I don't know how, but I just got orthotics. And probably cost my mom and dad a fortune. And since then, I had so many injuries, right? Like literally, I could count in like a 3-month span at least 5 or 6 ankle sprains. Is that something that you see a lot of people maybe kind of rely on, that you feel isn't necessary, and that's maybe something that you just train is like proprioception and more kind of like strengthening that joint as a whole? Or do you recommend it, or what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a certain place for orthotics. Obviously, if you have like dangerously flat feet and you have no ability to activate your arches, then maybe get to orthotics. But I'm always a firm believer that if you train your supportive arch muscles and you train your foot intrinsics and your toe flexors over a period of time, those muscles are going to get stronger and they're going to support your foot. So people come into me all the time and they're like, "What do you think about orthotics?" And usually they have plantar fascia pain. But I'll say, why don't we give these strengthening exercises like a really good go for a few months? We'll see how your foot feels then. We'll reevaluate, we'll reassess. And if you really think you can benefit from orthotics, then maybe we can go see a podorthist or something like that, right? But I got orthotics because I've got very, very flat feet and I'm very hypermobile. So my joints kind of move more than the average person. And that goes right down into the little bones in my feet as well. So as a jumping athlete, over and over and over again, 1,000 jumps a week, my feet started to pain me a little bit at the tail end of my career. So I go to orthotics basically just to help support my arch. But I also did arch lift exercises day in and day out, from sunrise to sundown. I'd be in class doing arch lift exercises just to help support my feet. And with that, I also had better proprioception. So I knew, I was conscious of when my arches were flat and when they were activated. So I'd spend some time, walking around the sub or warming up for volleyball practice or, eating breakfast. I'd engage my arches and I'd know they were engaged as opposed to sitting flat on the floor. Right. So I definitely think there's a time and place for orthotics, but I'm a firm believer that you should try to at least strengthen those foot intrinsics and those arch support muscles before you jump over to an orthotic.
Got you. And I think that's kind of along the same lines of what I think it is. I think that's for me a lot of what I would tell people for like any brace, any orthotic. You know what I mean? Like, do you really need your knee? Do you need your knee braces, or do you need this? Do you need that? Have you actually tried to just correct it? And if they say, yeah, I have, and I've tried most things and I'm quite aware and it's still not working, then great, then maybe invest. But I think sometimes it's like anything else. People try to find a quick fix. They put a brace on, think it's going to solve all their problems. And then if anything, it gets worse. So I think that's good insight from Cody T here. So cool, man. Last little bit, and I usually kind of do a bit of a quick fire round. So I thought it'd be cool to do a bit of a quick fire round, more so just on your go-to exercises. So go-to exercise for hip strength. And I guess, if we kind of look away from the squats and the deadlifts, but more so kind of like, isolation strength that, people are struggling with, what would you say is a go-to one for that?
Yeah, for hips, I'll usually keep it pretty simple with clamshell exercises. Sideline hip abduction is one of my favorite, as long as they're doing it right and hip flexors aren't taking over. Yeah. Seated banded external internal rotation, something as simple as that. And then I'll also give glute bridges as well. And another new one I've been on lately, nice close chain exercise, is a glute med activation against the wall. So I'm not sure if that's the real name of it, but basically you get them doing a single leg stance with their lateral shoulder on the wall, and then they kind of take their arm off, and then their glute med start to fire up big time. So
okay, cool. I might try to get some of these in the show notes so people can just click them directly later on. What about quad strength?
Quad strength, yeah, man. So I'll keep it pretty much as simple as quad squeezes or like quad overall exercise. A lot of time when it comes to a knee injury, people go through this inhibition period where they can't really activate their quads. So I'll throw the muscle stim on it, something as simple as an active straight leg raise. And then I'll start to progress that to a quad extension with some band resistance or a weighted cuff around their ankle or something like that.
Okay. What's your thoughts on leg extensions? Because I don't find my knees react very well to a leg extension for some reason.
Like a knee, like a quad extension exercise?
Yeah. So when you're just seated and you're doing like a leg extension at the gym.
Yeah.
I know some people it hurts. Like for me, sometimes I do it and it's fine. And then sometimes I'm like, it just doesn't feel right. It just feels like a bit too much, I don't know, like biomechanical tension almost on the joint. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm the same way. I much prefer to strengthen my quads with more functional exercises like squats and split squats and stuff like that. But with someone that's kind of rehabbing an injury and need to kind of break it down to the bare bones, they usually benefit from just basically trying to activate that muscle. So rather than loading it up pretty heavy, I'll usually go as high as maybe 2.5, 5 pounds, just so they get like better activation of that muscle group. But you're right, as soon as it takes that turn towards, more functional exercise, I'll have them doing, Bulgarian split squats and front loaded kettlebell squats and certain things like that. But on the, in the acute phase and the proliferative phase of an injury, I'll usually just have them doing basic extension exercises just to get in the habit of that movement pattern again and have that muscle firing properly.
Cool. That's helpful. I think that's going to help a lot of people in terms of this. I think the quad side of things. Ankle stability, we've kind of touched on it a bit. You can do some single leg kind of just holding one knee up in the air. You can go to a foam, I think you said, almost like something a little bit like a pillow maybe even.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're at home and you can't really find something, a pillow's perfect for that. And that being said, you can always close your eyes and kind of take away that visual stimulus to help progress that exercise. And people don't really understand until you get them to do it, that if you close your eyes and you're standing on one foot, like you're not going to be able to hold that for 30 seconds, man. It's a tough exercise. So
yeah, it is.
That's a good way to progress that at home. Another thing to be said about ankle stability is working on the foot intrinsics and the arch support muscles. So having better, like we said before, having better proprioceptive input from those areas will also help with ankle stability as well.
Awesome.
And yeah, and just to cap on that, I like to progress those to kind of what we call a controlled environment. So like the exercises are pretty standard, like they know what they're doing. And then we progress to an uncontrolled environment. So I'll have them stand on one leg and I'll bump them with a Bosu ball.
Yeah.
Or I'll wrap like a resistance band around them and have them jump, and I'll pull them in a direction so that when they land on their feet, they need that kind of proprioceptive input to be able to land properly. And then it helps with the proprioceptive input. 2, it helps with the confidence of the patient as well. So ankles are one of my favorite things to rehab, because on the tail end of it, you get to do these kind of perturbation exercises where you're pushing them and you're nudging them and you're sending them in different directions, right?
Yeah, no, I was just about to say, we call those perturbations, right, in the fitness world, for those of us that know what it means. And then pretty much like, it's like R&T training really, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah,
I do.
exactly.
That's one thing that I try to do with quite a few clients. We're using a band and just making them activate, you know, whether it's just like a shift in the hips or making them kind of compensate. And you can do so many things with the band and stuff, like to your point. Um, okay, cool. And then the last one, just because I think a lot of people actually have scapular instability and not many people know they do. Like, I bet you I do still. What are the big, easy kind of wins that you kind of use to help people with their scapular stability, strength overall?
Yeah, so I'll usually break it down to something as simple as a scapular tilt. So a lot of times you'll find someone with a scapular dysfunction and their scapular kind of sitting like in a little bit of a wing position. And I'll just keep it as simple as like basically activating those muscles that help medially tilt your scapula so they sit flush on your thoracic cage, right? And sometimes it's as simple as that. And we'll spend maybe a week or two on that before we progress. And activating those muscles is basically like a 10% shoulder blade retraction. So it's something super simple that they can kind of maintain throughout the day. And I'll have them work on that for a while before we start to progress to more scapular stability exercises. But once they get a good handle on that, I'll usually have them do scapular squeezes, so retraction exercises. I'll strengthen their serratus anterior with like a ball push against the wall or a push up with a plus. And then always, you got to try to target some low traps because those tend to be weak among a lot of the population. So I'll do the Y part of YTWs. That's a great exercise for that. Or wall slides with a little bit of a lift off at the top. Like that, just to try to get low traps firing. And then when you progress past all that, I like doing a lot of kettlebell work. So like an overhead kettlebell carry, or like a Turkish get up or something like that.
Awesome. I think that one is probably the one I was waiting for the most, because I think a lot of my clients, and I think a lot of people that just go to the gyms that I work at or manage, like the amount of stuff you see going on with their upper back and their shoulder blades is crazy. The last question on that one is, what, when people, like, as a PT, as a physio, when people are always over exaggerating people retracting their shoulder blades down and back, down and back, down and back. Do you see that as an issue as a physio? Like, do you feel like we're coaching that wrong?
I actually kind of see it as there's a certain time and place for down and back, and a lot of people are upper trap dominant, so you do need to really get them to depress their shoulder blades, right? But there's also people that don't really train, and this is probably more prevalent along the general population, where they don't really have good activation of their upper traps, and their scapula they're actually depressed when they sit on their shoulder blade at rest. They're kind of depressed, so that you need to start to train upper traps as well, just to help elevate that shoulder. So if our shoulder sits in a depressed position, well, the muscles connected to the top of our shoulder, our scapular elevators, are also connected to our neck. So if they're pulling down all day, well, then these muscles are going to shear our neck muscles, right? And then we start to get cervical pain and everything else. So a lot of times it's kind of teasing out, well, are they strong with shoulder elevation, or can they just not depress their shoulder blades? So you kind of got to decide, and that's where the full assessment comes in, right? Usually if there's someone that has a personal trainer and they're already into general strengthening, it's usually down and back, because that's what activates your lower traps. That's what holds your scapula in a strong position. But if it's someone that's kind of like, got this global weakness throughout their entire upper back, and generally they're just kind of deconditioned, you might have to look at their upper traps and see, do they have a really long trap ridge? Do they have good activation of their upper traps? And if not, you got to start to elevate their shoulder just to prevent neck pain and certain issues that come along with that, right? So, but for the sake of you guys, and athletes and people that are kind of avid gym goers and they're used to that, I'd say down and back is usually needed more than shoulder elevation. So
I think that's a big one, because the amount of people that you just hear in a gym go down and back, down and back, down and back, down and back. And sometimes I'm just like, I wonder if that's in the right context, because that's one thing, again, you learn, I think, probably in the physio world as well as like just the PT world over here, is there's always context, and you can't just judge what you see. There's always a reason, hopefully, and it's hopefully a good reason.
Yeah.
So awesome, man. And that's been really, really helpful, pal. So appreciate that. Cody, where can people find you, man? Because, you know, I know I've had you for a good hour. I know you were waving to your missus on camera, so she might be like, come on, Cody, we got to go do something. Yeah, where can people... What's that?
I was hoping you didn't see that.
No, that's all right. But yeah, where can people find you, man? What's going on in your life, all that stuff?
And so I'm now working at Beaverbank Physiotherapy. That's located on Sackville Drive. It's one of the more reputable clinics around Halifax. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, feel free to book an appointment. I'm starting to get more active on social media. That's something I'm more recently trying to dive into. So Cody Timmons PT is my handle. Feel free to shoot me a message if you have any questions about anything physio, rehab, fitness, exercise related. Would love any sort of question, any exposure to any of that. So other than that, yeah, I appreciate you having me on, Danny Q. It's been awesome, man. It's nice catching up with you.
Yeah, man, no problem. So just to kind of, I don't even know what I'm trying to say, but yeah, just to finish off the podcast, just massive thanks to Cody for coming on. It's always good kind of reconnecting with people from back home across the pond. My name's Dan Q. As always, all the information can be found in the show notes. Make sure to check out Cody, check out his handle, because he knows his shit. He proved it today. He's not winging it, as you know, I know I alluded to that earlier, but he's not. So yeah, Cody, thanks again, mate. I'm just going to stop the old podcast here.